This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, well, we might get started then. Thank you to everyone who's joined in live today. We are recording this session. I'm Melina Gillespie. I'm the president of the Southeast Queensland branch of the ASC. And before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Turrbal, Jagera and Yugara peoples, the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which this meeting is taking place today, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. So today we are very lucky to have Jenny Metcalf of eConnect Communication interviewing Katie Frisch, who's the Support Unit's Knowledge Manager for the Australian Pacific Climate Partnership. I'm actually going to hand it straight over to Jenny so that she can get started. Thanks, Jenny.
Well, welcome everyone. I see we have a small audience at the moment, but I'm sure I have an expanded audience. Either join us shortly or join us when the recording is made live. Very pleased to welcome Katie Frisch to our Tuesday Telltales today as part of the Southeast Queensland Australian Science Communicators Initiative. Katie is from Townsville, so she's further north than where we are in Southeast Queensland. And I was interested to hear that she left snowboarding in Colorado for scuba diving in Australia. Well, I have to say I've done the reverse of that. I actually stopped scuba diving in Australia due to sinus issues and started skiing in Colorado. But certainly hope to get back to scuba diving sometime later. And we'll find out more about why you switched from snowboarding to scuba diving soon. But Katie, you're the knowledge manager of Australia Pacific Climate Partnership. Before we delve into your history, I wanted to know what a knowledge manager does and specifically what they do with the Australian Pacific Climate Partnership. I notice you've been doing it since 2020, so I presume a lot of it so far has been online during COVID.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. I had a feeling you were going to ask me that question. It's a pretty common question when you see this position title of knowledge manager. It actually sounds very important, but and look, it is quite important, but I think it's a little bit misleading. My role is really more about knowledge brokering and knowledge translation. And although that does come with, by default, a lot of knowledge management, sometimes I feel like knowledge management sounds a bit like IT focused, like database management, which I don't do. But my role as the knowledge manager for the Australia Pacific Climate Partnership is really focused on making climate information more accessible, more understandable, more discoverable, more actionable for the Pacific programs that we support.
Okay, well, we'll find out a little bit more about what that means later on. But let's go back in time to when you were presumably growing up in Colorado. And I noticed that your first degree there was a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities, Biology and Art History. That's a very interesting combo. Couldn't you really work out what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Definitely not. I really struggled with that. And I think I struggled more because I had those 3 different majors and I was interested in everything. I remember always taking the maximum number of classes that the university would allow, which I hated myself for doing, after a week into the semester, but I just couldn't imagine, saying no to these great subjects that I could be learning about. I've always really loved learning, and I struggled between the right brain and the left brain. I was always really interested in science, really interested in the environment, but then had this draw towards the arts. And I have both in my family. So my uncle is a biology professor in Colorado. My mom was an artist. She has done lots of different types of art, fashion design and screen printing and all kinds of things. But yeah, lots of artists in the family and lots of scientists. So I've always been torn.
I noticed that the science part of what you've been doing, and it followed on in a master's degree, which you actually did over here at James Cook, has been mostly in that marine biology area. So was that a passion as you were growing up? I mean, Colorado is a fair way from the sea and from the ocean, mountains, not marine. So what got you interested in marine biology?
Well, fun fact, Colorado has the highest number of scuba divers of any landlocked state in the US.
Wow.
So I think in general, you know, us Coloradans are adventurous and we like outdoors, outdoor sports. So, you know, we do our skiing in the winter and mountain biking, kayaking, that kind of thing in the summer. And then when we go on a holiday, it's generally somewhere warm and tropical where we of course have to be busy doing things. So scuba diving is a pretty good fit. And yeah, I got certified when I was 18 in Turks and Caicos. It was very exciting and very, you know, glamorous and very different to what I was used to in Colorado. And I think, you know, after those long, cold winters in Colorado, I was chasing the summer. So it was a really natural fit. I thought I loved scuba diving. It just felt like I was on vacation. And I thought, well, what if I could just feel like I was on vacation every day and that could be my job? That would be pretty cool. So that's what brought me to Australia and to James Cook University, which is, of course, one of the best universities in the world for tropical marine ecology. And yeah, so that brought me here.
Well, before you get to James Cook, there was another little adventure along the way, which we'll come to. But before we come to that, do you have a favorite marine organism? For example, my favorite one is probably the seahorse. Do you have a favorite marine animal?
Well, I do love turtles. I mean, I have to say, every time I see a turtle underwater, it's something about swimming with a turtle just feels very peaceful. They're so old, they look so wise. But I also have kind of this strange, like, I feel strangely drawn towards pufferfish for some reason. They just, maybe the idea that they go around like in this innocent little, you know, innocent looking package and then they can just explode.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Michelle has put on to chat that she likes pufferfish as well. So you'll have to have a bonding with Michelle over pufferfish in the future. Definitely. Because she said that, which reminds me, if you've got questions for Katie, please put them in the chat. We'll come to your questions and you'll be able to ask them of Katie shortly. Before you came to James Cook, you did a stint at Walt Disney World as a marine conservation educator. What was that like, being at was it Disneyland? I'm not real sure about Disneyland or Disney World or the difference.
Yes. Disney World is much bigger than Disneyland. Disney World is in Florida, Disneyland is in California. And yes, I did a stint there. It was great. I was working as a marine education person in the aquarium, and I did all kinds of fun things. Like I was regularly presenting to groups of 300 people, giving spiels about, you know, this animal or that animal. We'd be in our scuba set underwater, feeding the fish, you know, hundreds and hundreds of fish swimming around you. So it was some really great times. But, you know, probably, if I'm being perfectly honest, although the job was great, the best part was just living there and, you know, getting to go on all the rides for free. It was actually it was a really fun program. It was part of the Disney World's college program, where they bring over university students from all over the United States. And in fact, they bring over people from all over the world to work in the parks. And they all live together. So it's a bunch of 18 to kind of 26-year-olds all living together.
Wow, that sounds wild.
Apartment complex. What could go wrong, right? What could not be fun about that?
But tell me, Katie, did you get a taste during that time for science communication?
Absolutely. And I think the thing that was really fun that I definitely took away from that experience with at Disney World was this idea of edutainment. It's like education but entertainment at the same time, and just seeing how excited people could be about learning about the environment, about learning about animals and what they could do to look after them. I mean, that was really inspiring, that it doesn't have to be boring, it could be fun, and that people can really feel motivated
Okay.
by fun.
But you moved on from there, as you said, to come to Australia, to James Cook University, because it's one of the best in the world. But was there something else about Australia that attracted you to come here, other than the quality of the studies at James Cook?
Oh, I think, deep down, everyone loves Australians, everyone around the world. There's this reputation of Australians as this like fun-loving, it's always summer, you're always on holiday, it's always always a joke, always a laugh. So I had this, this is the idealistic view, I had this idealistic view that Australia was going to be like chasing the summer, always fun, always on vacation, everyone with those cool Australian accents.
Okay, fantastic. And you did a master's at James Cook University, again in marine biology. So we're not yet into the science, communication, knowledge management, behaviour change yet, are we?
Not quite.
So
No.
what made you go and do further study in marine biology?
I guess I didn't see at that early stage of my career that I didn't really know about science communication really as a discipline. I didn't realize that could be a career option, and that maybe I wouldn't have had to do further study. But I also was just, really passionate about continuing to learn. I wanted to learn more about the marine environment in particular, and coral reefs. I just found them so fascinating. So yeah, I was really interested in further study, I think, for its own sake, maybe, but definitely starting to realize at that stage. I mean, I did my master's degree on fish genetics, and as I was, mind-numbingly pipetting my life away in a laboratory, I realized that this was not for me. This was not a good fit with my personality. So, whilst I was really passionate and excited and stimulated by the science, I wasn't really equally excited and engaged by the work that I was doing for my master's. So I didn't stick around for PhD. I just took the master's and ran, and just, really was at that stage looking for, what will I do next? What can I do with this that is going to bring these other interests into the mix and allow me to still stay in science, but not in this part of science that I found very tedious and boring, but more in that part that I found, stimulating and exciting.
Was there something that made you realize science communication was an option? Because not long after finishing your master's, you started a range of different communication jobs at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and the wet North Queensland dry tropics, and so on. Was there something that showed you there was an opportunity in science communication at some stage? Yeah,
look, I mean, I think I had been heading that way. Obviously, even the work that I did with Disney previously, and kind of in that science education space, like that was starting to become clear. But I think it was a bit of a game changer when I started at the Australian Institute of Marine Science in a science communication role. And I had, kind of, I guess, my first of a number of eureka moments where I thought, oh, this is perfect. I can talk about all this science. I can still learn forever. And then I can share this passion that I have with the rest of the world. And I can, bring the creative aspects that I that I really enjoyed from my kind of arts and English degree, and I can bring that writing, I can bring that creativity into the mix, and I can actually, and the education stuff as well. It was kind of just this perfect fit of all these different interests that I've had over the years.
And then somewhere there in between working for these North Queensland research and management agencies, you went back to Colorado and you lectured in coral reef ecology plus literature at the same time. So what motivated that little elaboration?
Yes, well, clearly still conflicted in my loyalties, but I went back to visit my family, spend some time with my family. I hadn't seen them for quite a while, and my uncle is a professor at the university in the town that I grew up in, and he said, "Oh, we're always looking for people to come and help out with this course or that course." And so I said, "Yeah, great, that sounds good." And whilst I'm there, I'll chat with someone in the English department, and why not? If I'm going to be teaching for a semester or two, might as well teach. And yeah, it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed both kind of equally. So that was really, again, just bringing together all that multiverse of skills that I think you get to draw on in a science communication role.
Now, I'm going to open it up soon for questions, so don't forget you can put them in the chat. And because we've got a smallish group here today, I may also allow you to put up your hand and turn your video on and ask as well. But before we do, Katie, on your resume CV, it says the number one thing that you now call yourself is a behaviour change strategist. What do you mean by that? And then I'm going to ask you about one of your projects, which you do with your consulting company, C+, which is about boosting shark smart behaviours in the Whitsunday Islands. But first of all, what's a behaviour change strategist?
Well, look, I mean, I guess I like to start at the beginning of the journey, because for me, I really was passionate about science, but then I sort of realized that science had application, and it was quite empowering for me to work as a science communicator and first of all, be part of that dissemination of science. But then, working for organizations like the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and moving more into that ecosystem management space, it became really apparent that part of my role in the science communication arena was really about influencing change, and it was about being part of the change solutions, like for example with resource management, and I think that prompted me. Well, in fact, it was really a task that I was given. I was working for the climate change unit within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and one of our objectives was to reduce the carbon footprint. This was, way back in like 2009, reduce the carbon footprint of everyone in the Great Barrier Reef catchment. And I thought, well,
easy.
How on earth are we going to do that? I mean, yeah, like it was very aspirational back then, but I took it quite literally, and I thought, well, God, what's a carbon footprint? Let's break this down and let's understand how we're going to go about this. And that did kind of open up this, I guess, the rabbit hole a little bit to look at how do you change behaviors? What is the carbon footprint? What specific behaviors would we need to change if we were going to achieve this kind of very lofty goal, which quickly, made me feel quite depressed at the unlikely reality of us actually, having a significant impact in that specific role. But I think it also inspired me to explore further, to study more, to learn about the application of behavioral science and in the communication space and beyond. And that study has, I guess, ignited a passion in behavioral strategy development. So I guess I like to imagine that there would be more positions for behavioral strategists to help programs intentionally design behavior change approaches that are based in science, that are more likely to be effective, and that are well thought through. And I often have seen that this is more of an afterthought for a lot of programs. But hopefully we're going to see more of that trend. We're certainly starting to see more of that trend in the environment space, in the development space as well. And I think we're going to see more of it into the future.
So how do you teach people to have a shark smart behavior in the Whit Sundays? Surely it means just not swimming.
Well, that's certainly one way of reducing your risk. Oh, like that was a really fascinating project because the first question we had to ask is, what is a shark smart behavior? And of course, it's one of these things that's quite difficult to research. You can't exactly go out and, try different behaviors and see if you get a bite.
So to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. So we took an interesting approach, which was to look at the available peer-reviewed literature, but also to look at to have a lot of stakeholder discussions and to really look at more of the anecdotal information that was available, and to try to identify what were some of the shark smart behaviors that we thought we could look at promoting in the region, and then thinking through how we might go about doing that. It's a very interesting situation in the Whit Sundays because there are a lot of different types of user groups in the marine park. There are lots of different activities happening side by side, and some of those activities are more shark attracting. And then sometimes those activities, for example, people swimming, are not where you want to have shark attraction happening. So, one of the so part of it is education, but interestingly, we found that people actually already in general had a pretty high level of understanding of what shark smart behaviors were, with the exception of a few kind of key behaviors. But yeah, and I mean, I think it's like with all of these.
What's the most important shark smart behavior? What's the single most important thing to do to avoid being bitten by a shark?
Well, I just like to apply just general logic in this situation. Sharks are attracted to fish because they eat fish. So anything that we do that potentially attracts fish to a place where we might be also wanting to get in and go for a nice dip is probably not the best idea. Okay. So that you can extend that to lots of different types of behaviors, of course, fishing and other behaviors that attract sharks. So for example, we know that human waste is an attractant. Food going overboard, there's lots of things that can attract sharks, and we generally want to separate those activities from our swimming and snorkeling activities.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're getting a number of questions in, but I noticed one of your skills, and it relates, I guess, to Claire Mullen's question, who's currently in Fiji and says Bulla. Hi, Claire. And I think you know Claire.
I do.
But one of your skills is Pacific Island climate solutions. And so Claire asked, well, what do you do at the Australian Pacific Climate Partnership? So tell us more about your current work with the partnership.
Okay. So with the partnership, our role primarily is to ensure that Australian aid investments in the Pacific region are considering climate and disaster impacts in their program design and implementation, but also considering how they can contribute to climate and disaster resilience in Pacific communities and programs. So, we work with lots of Australian aid investments in the Pacific because there are lots. But my specific role is really about making climate and disaster knowledge more accessible and more actionable. So with this idea that the ultimate goal is behavioral change, I like to start from that place and think about, okay, what do we need people to be doing differently? What specific actions do we need people to be adopting in order to achieve this improved resilience within their program or improved resilience within a specific context? And then with that in mind, what are the barriers that we potentially can overcome with the tools that we have? Are there some barriers that are related to information access or education that we can address? And then how do we go about doing that in a way that is context specific and recognizes the needs of the audience? So I also tend to have, I'm definitely a big picture person rather than a detail person. So I'm always thinking, beyond the immediate task at hand. So although we service initially the Australian aid program, our audience for our knowledge brokering work is much broader, and we're looking at really how can we shift practice and contribute to this improved climate dialogue and knowledge brokering across the region. So we develop products that we hope have a much broader application than just within the Australian aid program, but are actually relevant to all development work. And for example,
I was about to say, can you give me an example of that?
Sure. So one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is we're developing an animation series that helps explain climate impacts and climate adaptation examples for each of the different development sectors. So we look at what's happening in the Pacific context. So we look at what's happening in terms of climate impacts in the health sector, and what are some of the adaptation solutions that the health sector might need to think about implementing in order to become more resilient. And then we look at all of that within a Pacific context. So we've actually got an established series and we're just adding to it. And then as we grow, that series is also becoming a suite of capacity building modules where we're going to go out and do some training with a network of Pacific climate knowledge brokers. And we're super excited about that work.
So the use of cartoons sounds a little bit what is sometimes known as edutainment, which sometimes gets a bad rap in science communication. But can it make a difference to how people behave at all?
Well, that's a tricky question. We know that information and action are not one and the same. Just because we know what we should be doing doesn't mean that we are actually doing it. So, I think what we can do is we can say that having the basic information that we need is a step in that process of change. That's one of the reasons that in this animation series, for example, we try to call out really specific examples and really specific actions that you can take. So for when we're talking about climate resilient infrastructure, we go down to the detail of, you can put shutters on the windows so that if you've got a cyclone, you've got strength there. We talk about some of those specific examples, not exhaustively, but because we want people to start to think about what specific actions they might implement in their program. And then we also have a link to a planning process. So part of this capacity building training is really about carving out a space where we allow people to think about how these issues actually impact their program and what they can actually do about that. We walk them through a structured planning process.
So in terms of the animations, Claire's asked for the URL in the chat. So when you get a chance, you might
Sure.
add that in there for Claire and anyone else who's interested in those URLs.
Sure.
I wanted to come back to this whole idea of behaviour change, because it's a very hard thing to actually know whether you've achieved it, I think. So how do you know when you've been successful, and do you have any examples of behaviour change that you've seen happen in your work or any personal life even? So personal behaviour change.
Look, well, it is difficult, and I think the more complex the space you're working in, sometimes the more challenging it is to measure. Also, it's often difficult to find a program that's set up and funded appropriately to, to monitor and evaluate any sorts of behavioral changes. So often I feel like we're kind of doing our best, but it's far from working in a perfect world. But personally, in one of my first kind of forays into I'm going to try to tackle this very specific behavioral change was I'd gone back to Colorado and I was visiting my mom, and I'd been in Australia for years where recycling is the norm. But in Colorado, in this particular town, recycling wasn't the thing at the time. It just wasn't a common thing. And I said, Mom, you really got to get with the program. You need to get recycling. Like, look at all this stuff that's going to landfill. It could be recycled. And great idea, but didn't change. Okay, what am I going to do here? And lots of failed attempts. But eventually I called up the recycling company, made a booking, asked them to come out, paid for the first couple months, went out to the equivalent of Bunnings and got a bunch of, bins. They have to separate everything there, labeled them, set it all up. And, overnight she was recycling. And that was, and not only that, she became this, massive advocate for recycling in the community because she saw how much, waste was building up in her recycling bins, and it gave her this nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that she was contributing. And that to me was really like a key moment of understanding that it wasn't about providing her with information. It wasn't about that she didn't believe in the cause. She believed in the cause. She was all for it. It was really about removing the barrier to her, which was her time. She just was too busy. She had too many other distractions in her life, as we all do. And it was really about how do you make this easy? And the default is that it's already happening. You don't have to do anything. In fact, if you want to undo it, that's going to take more effort. So I think that was a pivotal moment in understanding how behavioral change works and what are the drivers of change. Oh, you muted.
Yeah, a great example. Thanks, Katie. You deal in spaces that are sometimes controversial. Shark conservation, climate change, changing visitor behaviours, changing the way we do things. How do you deal with those who have strong negative opinions?
Yes. Well, I think it was Sam Hamm who said something like, if you haven't royally, peeved off about 70% of your audience, you probably don't have, or 30% at least, you don't have a good message. So I think it is that, I don't know, I actually hadn't really thought about that. I have worked in a lot of controversial spaces, and I definitely have, and I have definitely had my fair share of fallout from that. But I remember an animation series that I developed for the Marine Park Authority was the subject of one of the government question times, and that was a bit of a nervous period. But we were talking about the reality of the situation that we're facing, and I think that is often controversial. It's difficult in the work I do now. Certainly the shark stuff and the Whitsunday is also controversial, but I think when you're coming from a place of truth, you're coming from a place of science, you're coming from a place of we're trying to do the right thing, we're trying to help people make decisions that will be in their best interest in the future, then you kind of helps thicken the skin, I guess. Yeah.
I do welcome more questions. There's a couple more that I need to ask on the chat, but I do welcome more questions. If you want to turn your video on and ask a question and put up your hand, you're also welcome to do that. I wanted to ask you about a question Michelle's put into the chat, and that was, do you think there now are more recognised career options for people to combine their interests in art and science than there were in the past? Or do you still think we have to carve out a niche for ourselves? I mean, I was in a similar space to you in that I ended up doing 2 separate undergraduate degrees, one in science, one in journalism. So it's, yeah, it's that. But are there more options now for that combination?
I mean, definitely, yes, for sure, to a degree, but I think we've got a long way to go still. You know, I think we still, you still see program designs that have the same sort of, you know, core positions, and, you know, we're not seeing positions for science communicators. I do think that now, you know, knowledge broker is a bit of a popular term, and that's a kind of an opportunity in a way to reinvent and redefine science communication in a kind of a new context. It's more about, you know, it goes beyond just science communication, and it's about filling, you know, knowledge gaps and brokering research partnerships and information partnerships and all kinds of things. So that's an opportunity, I think, and we're seeing more roles for people in that knowledge brokering space. There's definitely a recognition, I think, in the world that this knowledge synthesis is really pretty important, but frankly, I'm not sure people see the model of how to deal with that always. But I think we're getting there, but I think we've got a long way to go. But the other thing is, I guess, you know, I think people can be quite creative about how to bring their passions together, as we have been. And necessity is the mother of invention. So, you know, people will find ways to make it work. Yeah, and I think that there is a bit more diversity in the types of roles that we see now.
Yeah. I often see this term knowledge broker used more and more. I think it first started to arise when Peter Cullen, the late, great Peter Cullen, invented it for his e-water cooperative research centre. But in some ways, often there's a bit of snobbery between knowledge brokers and science communicators. Do you see it like that?
No, but I never. Oh, look, I mean, I'm like let's all get along and like love each other. Like, I think it's like it's a spectrum, you know. I think that there's skills that are transferable across both disciplines. I don't see that there's a massive distinction. I mean, I think knowledge brokering is a bit broader in some respects, and science communication can be a little bit more targeted in some respects. But I mean, you could easily define it the other way around. I think, I don't know, I think that sometimes these terms just come up and describe a need that has been there for a long time, and that we just haven't, you know, we haven't really nailed how to fix it. So we're like, oh, let's try this new approach.
I guess you're not going to say, yes, you are being a snob when I phrase it like that. So perhaps that was I didn't really ask that question in a subtle way. Anyway, but I agree with you. I think there's that, you know, whatever you call yourself, you're involved in some form of science communication, at, you know, evidence-based communication. And for me, it's not just about Western science, it's about other forms of knowledge as well. I'm sure that you would see that as well.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you a personal question. Now that you're pursuing a career in both science and arts, are you closer to the artists or the scientists in your family?
Ooh, interesting. Interesting question. I think when I was growing up, because I was always a bit, I don't want to say I think I was a bit ahead in terms of the studio art kind of stuff, because my mom spent so much time helping me practice growing up, but I very much felt funneled down that path of the arts, and yet I didn't see how I was possibly going to make a living as an artist, and yeah, I felt a bit uncomfortable. But I will say that the more I evolve in my career, the more I the more I question those thoughts that I had when I was young, the more I see the value of art, and the more, I guess, and maybe it's that security as well. Like, as I'm more secure, the more I'm interested in the artistic side of the work that I do, the creative side. The more time I tend to want to spend in that part of the discipline. so I would say I'm still equally close to both sides of the family, but very diplomatic.
Yes, it is very diplomatic.
Well, it's my mom, my mom's the artist, so of course I'm really close to her.
So that ability to understand art, has that helped you in working successfully with animators, for example, which is one of the questions about tips for working with animators?
Definitely. Absolutely. I think that actually, the background in art, but also I think I draw a lot on my behavioral change and behavioral science, I guess, background, and that I'm constantly finding that, just how a script is worded or just which examples you use really can make a difference in how well people understand a concept. And I think just even that thinking about how to use learnings from behavioral science, like behavioral modeling, for example, and then apply that in animation. That's one of the real opportunities within animation. We can show people, we can show people doing the thing we want people to be doing. And that's one way of reinforcing that behavior that we're seeking.
Okay, my last question. So what's next on the horizon for Katie Frisch as you move forward into your various careers as a behaviour change strategist, a science communicator, and a social marketer?
Oh, are we talking like the 1-year plan or the 5-year plan, or
maybe both in a nutshell?
Well, look, I'm pretty committed to seeing through this capacity building work that we're doing in the Pacific. I think this is a really exciting, hopefully phase shift in terms of understanding how to action climate information, which is, we continually get feedback that this is where people get stuck. They get this kind of bombarded with all this really important science projections and climate projections, but then don't necessarily know what to do next. So I'm really committed to that in the short term. In the long term, I would really like to see us band together as science communicators, knowledge brokers, creatives, and people who share this vision around the importance of not just making information accessible, but really driving social change with the kind of work we do. I would love to see us looking for more opportunities to work together to develop, I don't know if it's foundations or consultancies or what that looks like, but think tanks and organizations that can deliver the kinds of solutions that we know how to deliver and that we know people want. And we seem to not, you've done a great job, obviously, Jenny, with eConnect, but there needs to be more of that, more organizing and more.
Ooh, it looks like we're
providing that service.
Thank you so much, Katie. Now, there's one more question in chat, which is really good. So we'll just get a quick answer because we're already on time. But Adele Coots asked what training or what useful places you found on behaviour change models and techniques. So can we get a quick answer on that? And while you're thinking of that, can I get everyone to put on their video? I know Claire can't, she's in Fiji on limited bandwidth, but the rest of you, put on your videos and let's say hello to everyone while Katie's coming up with a quick answer to that last question from Adele.
Okay, Adele, well, I definitely had one of my many eureka moments when I first attended Doug Mackenzie Moore's community-based social marketing. I think that's a really great training program, but there's heaps of other great training programs. I worked for an NGO called RARE, which is one of the only environment and behavior change, if not the only environment and behavior change focused NGOs in the world. They work in like 60 countries, and they have some really fantastic resources, including behavior change for environment behavior. Oh, I'll find it and send it to Jenny, and she can disseminate it. But because like behavior change for environmental practitioners or something along those lines, or behavior change for conservation maybe. And they work really closely with the Behavioral Insights team, which of course was the original UK-based kind of behavior change gurus. And they have lots of great training programs. In fact, they have a branch in Australia as well as the UK and other parts of the world. They've got some really great frameworks. I have actually developed my own because I like to cherry pick bits and pieces that kind of work for me. So I've developed my own framework and my own toolkits and things like that. And I'm happy to have a chat about that if that's of interest, but I think there's lots out there.
Katie, what we might get you to do is to send us links to some of those things, including to your animation URL, and we'll share it with the people that were here at today, and perhaps put it also on the list when we put the recording on the Ask Facebook site. Is that all right, Michelle and Melina? They're nodding. Okay. All right. So it leaves me to say thank you very much, Katie, for a highly entertaining, interesting and informative session. Really appreciate your time and the session. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, that's very kind, Jenny, but thank you so much. It's been really an honor to get to chat with you, who has been one of my science communication idols for many years. And so it's really a privilege. Thanks so much, Jenny. And thanks to everyone else. And shout out to Claire in Fiji, who we were chatting last week, not for nearly long enough, but
oh, there she is.
Hi, Claire.
Sorry, I'm looking a bit messy at the end of the day next to the swimming pool, but you know, what can you do? But I'm back to Melbourne tomorrow and it's going to be disgusting. So I'm making the last of the warm weather. Good to see you all, and thanks Jenny and Katie and Michelle for a great session. Much appreciated.
Okay, bye everyone.
See ya. Good to see ya. Bye.
Have a good evening.